Hey guys and girls, Bored now back with you for another television review, and on this video I will be reviewing the final part of the BBC Netflix new version of Dracula. This is of course by Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat. So the final part, sorry this is a bit later than maybe expected. It aired last night of course. The episode is called The Dark Compass, so it concludes this new reimagining. And this part is set in modern day England, so they basically brought it back to the future, or to the present I should say, Freudian slip there. And Dracula, of course, at the end of the last episode was buried in the casket. He went to the bottom of the ocean and he decided to have a rather long nap, very long in fact, 123 years, and he chose to wake up all those years later, over a century later, and he was in modern day England on the shore, and Van Helsing, in a very different, obviously sort of persona if you like, was waiting for him. She's now like an operative with like the government, and she was there waiting for him to arrest him, and that's kind of how we ended the previous episode. So I'm going to get into this episode obviously, but before I begin, what I'll say is, having seen this episode, it's actually really frustrating because, having not really liked the previous two episodes at all, this episode did, to some extent, mostly I'd say, bring it back around. In my opinion, this was by far the best of the three episodes, and it sort of shows what you can do with a reimagining. Because I actually think the stuff they do in the present in this episode, and the satire on like social media and kind of using very kind of shallow, sort of like human traits, like sleeping around, clubbing, well not clubbing, but you know what I mean, going out there just sleeping around, living carefree, kind of living a bit of an empty sort of existence, not really caring about people around you, which becomes, the trapping of one of the characters in this episode. I think connecting that to Dracula and his character is actually, a really smart idea. And you do get some really good sort of comments on modern culture in this episode, technology and various things, and connecting it to Dracula and what have you. And what it does is, by switching up the setting, it actually gives, fresh material to do with the Dracula character. It gives him almost a fresh new set of things to play off. Whereas I think with the previous two episodes just being set in like the sort of regular, settings and eras that you associate with Dracula, unless they were like really well done, really fresh, it's harder to really update the story that much in those settings. I mean, obviously it had a go and it, totally failed for me. So watching this episode, which isn't perfect, there's things wrong with it, particularly towards the end, I think. But watching this episode, especially the first half of it, just made me so frustrated, because you think, yes, this is what the whole of the series could be. The whole of this three-part, one-off thing could have been. Because it just hit me, then the other two episodes could have been set in like modern day England as well, and that way you could have fleshed things out and done different things with the other characters, which I'll discuss as I go through the episode. But yeah, it actually does end mostly on a higher. Again, it's not perfect. There are still issues, but this was certainly a much stronger episode, and it's an episode which was doing a lot of interesting things. And I think when you end on an episode like this, it makes it all the more, sort of annoying, kind of how bad the previous two were, because, when I started the series, when I went into that first episode, I was reasonably hopeful. I was looking forward to seeing it because it had good people involved. And, the sign, I mean, the trailers didn't look great, but the signs were by the trailers, and from what I was hearing, then they were trying to do something modern and exciting with it. And then it was such a big letdown, really, that first episode. And then I thought that the second part was even worse. So it was the opposite going into this third part than I had going into the start of it, because I was totally, not looking forward to it, deflated. So at least from that point of view, it was a nice surprise. Then it was actually a pretty good final part. But yeah, it's also a case of what could have been. So, like the last episode, we start in the past. We start in 1897. So with Dracula and Van Helsing still kind of doing this kind of back and forth between them, and he's still, taking her with him to places. He's still like in her head essentially. And it's almost like this sort of thing they have where wherever he's going, she's going with him to ultimately try and stop him and protect society. So, they go into the New World, as it is, to modern day England, and so they transport, and again, it's playing on the sexuality. So she's like, come on, suck on it, basically, as he, bites into her. And there are some interesting twists in this episode, which I'll talk about. But yeah, as I said, we literally jump forward 123 years. And we see him appear in the bedroom of this girl. He's there in broad daylight, and as it turns out, he's killed her husband downstairs. And it's in these scenes where you actually get some really sharp sort of little like jokes and satirical sort of comments because of, and this is one of the advantages of like moving things forward to present day, because it opens up these possibilities for the Dracula character where it sort of shows you that he obviously from a different era, literally, he doesn't know modern things. He doesn't understand technology. So he basically puts this woman's husband in a fridge, and she's obviously freaking out, and he says, when she mentions the fridge, he says, is the fridge the white box thing? So I just love that outsider alien sort of perspective, not knowing what a fridge is. And then there's another comment when he's in like the scene when he first arrives with Van Helsing, as she's known, Professor Van Helsing or Dr. Van Helsing, that he doesn't know what helicopters are. He calls them flying things. What are those flying things? So there's some brilliant like lines in this episode. Really, really sharp sort of humour and satire. And really thought-provoking lines. I think maybe my favourite line is when he's looking around the house, this woman's house, and he's like, I knew the future would bring wonders, but I didn't know it would be ordinary, sort of thing. And it's kind of one of these really smart sort of lines. that taps into, I think, what a lot of people would say. Then, with all this technology, why do we use it for such mundane things as we do? I'm not saying that that point of view is necessarily right, but it's kind of one of these ironic things that we have so many sort of endless possibilities with, you know, the advancements of technologies and that. So it's kind of like, we use it for this, we use it for this, that kind of feeling which some people would have. So really some smart lines in there. And another one I really like, which again, this one is like sort of nodding to the whole sexy Dracula thing, the whole and it's just a fun little meta joke. So she asks him about, when she realizes he's a vampire, she asks him about his reflection. You know, can you not? You can't see your own reflection, right? That's part of the legend. And he says, "Do I look like someone who can't see their reflection in the mirror?" Just another brilliant line. So there's a number of great lines in this episode, and again, it's debunking, sorry, some of the myths, which I think has been part of the commentary throughout the 3 episodes. But again, they're using like modern spaces, modern like devices as part of it, and I think this episode is when the Van Helsing character is at her strongest, and when I actually cared a bit more about the rivalry with Dracula. It never really grabbed me in any of the previous 2. And so I really like how smart she is and how she does outsmart him at different times. So, for example, when they track him to this house, and she's left a box in there, and they're surrounding the house, and they've got guns, obviously, and Van Helsing basically says, "Get in the box." And then he's kind of like, "Well, you do know I'm under a roof, right?" And the whole sunlight thing. And she says, "Yes, I realise that." And the next thing you know, they smash like a crane sort of thing into the. So suddenly sunlight appears and it freaks it out. More on that later, by the way. But anyway, she's saying, you know, get in the box. It's a whole back and forth, and eventually he does, but he sort of only does it when she gets inside, and eventually, you know, corners him. But it shows her really starting to think, because she's essentially, in a way, she's got him trapped in the house, and the way she turns the table with the crane and stuff kind of forces his hand somewhat. And again, we get this quite operatic sort of back and forth, these conversations, between Van Helsing and Dracula. Sorry. So you get these quite stylish little dream sort of sequences and these sort of conversations. And I mean, what basically happens in the first part of the episode is then, you know, he obviously they get him, so he's in this like storage facility, and they're kind of doing tests on him. And what happened is the Jonathan character from the first episode, obviously he died many years ago, but because of what happened to him at the hands of Dracula, he now has a foundation, and you know, it's for testing and stuff, and it's for people, you know, giving blood and stuff. And so you get this character of Jack, and he's one of the weak points of the episode, and I'll sort of say why in a minute. But in any case, he's like one of these medical students who have signed up to, to sort of give their blood and stuff. And obviously the twist is then obviously now Dracula has appeared and they've captured him. But Jack becomes a link between Dracula and, well, the other side of the story with Van Helsing, because what happens is Jack has this friend Lucy who, is really shallow, really kind of superficial, and they're kind of on and off. You sort of hear at one point then they've sort of been together, but she's not really interested in anything concrete. She's just interested in sleeping around, and they still hang out as friends, but she's very, carefree and likes to sleep, but quite really superficial actually. And so we see her in this club scene and it brings in the whole like Tinder generation and dating apps and stuff. So she's picking guys up willy-nilly on this dating app. At one point, well, there's like this really shallow, really nasty piece of work, American guy who she's found on this app, and apparently she's only into him because he's rich, so she's sort of only into him partly because of his money, and he, he doesn't care about her at all. He kind of makes it clear that she's good looking, that's why I'm with her. And at one point they're supposed to, like, they get engaged sort of thing, but Jack is obviously hurt because he likes her a bit more than just as a friend. But this becomes a link because essentially she becomes Dracula's like target. So these things connect sort of thing throughout the episode. But what happens is I'll deal with the stuff in the when he's still under arrest, and you kind of know he's going to escape at some point. I mean, I think that's one of the problems, but so they have this twist where, and I sort of like all the stuff with the Foundation. I think again that's some smart stuff. The fact that they're studying Dracula. And it's all interesting stuff, and I think the rivalry between Van Helsing and Dracula is really more interesting in this. And again, this scene is quite jokey because he's been on Skype, as it happens, in his like cell, and she's like, Van Helsing's like, who gave him the password? But anyway, he's been on Skype, and he's been in contact with his lawyer. Yes, he has a lawyer, and his lawyer is played in a cameo by Mark Gatiss. So here's the thing, I quite like the idea of Dracula having a lawyer. It makes perfect sense. And he says, they say them basically the firm has been representing him for years and, well, hundreds of years basically. So it dates back a really long way. And obviously this guy is just the latest lawyer to represent him. So I do like this idea of, and they fudge it a little bit, but essentially they kind of do this thing where he gets his release because they can't really pin on anything on him, not at this particular time. I mean, he did kill on the shore, but then there seems to be this weird sort of beat where one of the doctors doesn't want to admit to that, or it's either that there's no evidence or just them because they're doing these tests and they don't want to sort of jeopardize that. And I wasn't quite clear on the reason in there, but anyway, so he ends up getting his release. But you can see what I mean. It's already kind of stretching the credibility a little bit. And then this lawyer actually starts like helping him out. He actually starts helping him find potential victims. And I mean, okay, it's satire and it's exploring these ideas. It's fair enough, and they're interesting ideas. It kind of stretched credibility, and over the course of the episode, it does get a little weak. So when he's out, he starts courting different people online. So again, that's another smart idea. Using like modern technology, using dating apps to find victims, and it's almost quite sort of jokey as well, the fact that he's treating them as potential dates. He's talking about them, this person likes this person, so even though he's just in it to kill them, he's treating them as if they were actual dates. So the satire in this episode is actually really clever, and far more interesting than in the previous two episodes, where it didn't have much to say at all, I didn't think. But we're sort of getting to the crux of the episode and the sort of problems. So Lucy is this fleeting spirit, as I said, this sort of not exactly bad girl, but very sort of shallow, sleeps around, doesn't really care. So she's obviously taken in quite easily by Dracula. And there's this whole thing in the episode where she's kind of what Dracula has been looking for all these years, because she essentially is different from everyone else, or he sees her as different in the sense that she doesn't care. She doesn't care about dying. She likes to live life on the edge so much. And she's actually turned on by Dracula. She's turned on by the thought of dying. Now, when things play out later, and in reality, when she's actually going through it, when he kills her, when she's in that, that undead state in between being a human and turning into a vampire, she then does regret it more, and she's going through hell, as you would expect. But it's an interesting idea, and it brings it back around at the end to the relationship with her and Jack, and you get this sort of comment on the fact that at the end she's very decrepit and sort of ugly, and you're afraid to kiss me now, aren't you, Jack, sort of thing. And obviously Dracula's like, oh, this is my perfect sort of creation almost. But you get in like playing with themes like that. But the problem is, I mean, there's two problems with this plot. One is, I think it does sidetrack from the Dracula Van Helsing thing for too long in the episodes, which is kind of the main hook for me. That gets sidetracked. And the other thing is, I think when stuff goes down with Lucy, and when obviously you're meant to care about her, and you're meant to, feel bad for Jack as well, what he's going through, you kind of don't, because Lucy's, most of the time you see her, Lucy's just this really quite shallow character who's not very likable. Quite hard to, watch her scenes, get along with her, be invested. And this is why I think it should have been, all three episodes should have been them set in the present day. Just focus it out more. You could add 3 episodes building Jack and Lucy, their relationship. I mean, obviously it didn't always have to be with them, but you could have fleshed their relationship out more. You could have fleshed out Lucy as a character and what's going to happen to her with Dracula. And I think if they did that, then you would care more about Lucy. or I would care more about Lucy. I like the ideas, I like some of the satire and the themes, but you just don't care enough, or at least I didn't. So, I mean, that was a problem, and the fact that, and as I said, it sidetracks the plot. Jack's just a plot device, really. I think he has a very tenuous sort of connection. I think it is more about Lucy. Jack's just a way to get one side of the plot together with the other half. So his character, in a way, I cared about even less. And the actor's not very good. I thought he was a pretty wooden actor. So that didn't really work for me. Another thing I did like in the episode was this twist with Van Helsing, and when Dracula tries to kill her, he can't, and the reason he can't, they find out later, is because she has cancer. So her blood is contaminated, and she can't be killed by a vampire the way everyone else can. So that was a nice little twist, and we end up with this thing with them where they basically both are gonna live forever, but obviously on the other side. And so Van Helsing, or the modern Van Helsing, the Dr. Van Helsing, is basically dying from cancer, and it's, her last sort of act sort of thing to finally outdo Dracula. So we get this twist at the end of the episode, and this is another misnote for me. This is another problem, because you get this reveal, then all the rules that have been set up over, I mean, obviously it's over various interpretations of vampires and Dracula, but over the course of the series, they do this thing where they reference the rules of the beast, which was the name of the first episode, and so it's kind of this way of connecting the all three, if you like. So they start off by setting out the rules with that first episode, and then they've brought it all together here. So it's kind of like trying to be almost like an essay sort of thing. But here's the twist. The twist is that the rules that have been set up, they don't mean a thing. She outsmarts him, and she says, "You've been made to believe these rules by the myths of vampires and what have you." So as it turns out, and I said I would come back to this, as it turns out, the no sunlight rule, sunlight kills them, is a fantasy. It doesn't actually in this universe. So they're playing with conventions. So Dracula finds out when she whips the curtains open, sunlight beams in on him, he doesn't die, and she explains it. And she's sort of saying, "Oh well, you've lost, because basically you've been exposed now, and you're alive forever, and you're going to be alone, and blah 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 blah." So it's all metaphor stuff. But that twist is so weak for me. It's kind of the stuff we've been doing up to now, it's all been a practical joke. And it just fell flat. Again, we get quite a powerful visual ending with Dracula and Van Helsing. So we see them in the afterlife together. And you don't see much of Mina, by the way. Jonathan's girlfriend. She appears briefly in this episode in one of the scenes. So that's a disappointment, the fact we didn't see more of her, because she has motivations and what have you. But maybe they just thought it would be too much to cram in. So the twist at the end of the episode left me cold. like many of the twists in the series. But actually, a lot of the stuff they were doing throughout the episode, a lot of like the kind of comments on modern culture and various things, they actually worked really, really well. So this is the strongest episode, I think. It at least ended on a bit of a high, but as I said, frustrating because it just showed you what the series could have been. I think that is the mistake. I think they should have set the whole thing in modern England, and that should have been what this version of Dracula was about. The stuff in the past, it was too clever by half, and it just didn't work for me. It just wasn't exciting. It wasn't particularly scary. It was uneven, and it was a weak Dracula. He just didn't have enough of a presence. He just felt too much like a showman, too much of a pastiche, if you like. But in this modern setting, they managed to do something different. So I have to give it a thumbs down overall. I mean, even in this last episode, there's things wrong, but it's the other two episodes that really drag it down. So it's still a thumbs down for me, sadly. But yeah, at least something good came of it in the last episode. So that's my review of Dracula, my review of the final episode, and feel free to agree or disagree in the comments below. Remember now, the 3 episodes are all up on the BBC iPlayer, and they're also up on Netflix, so get in touch when you've seen them. Let me know what you thought of the series overall, and I'll be back with more TV reviews soon. Goodbye.